Hey everyone, welcome back to our final video in my video lecture series covering the different branches of government. Our final video is going to cover the Illinois Judicial Branch, so the state judicial branch of government. We've covered the legislative and the executive branch. Hopefully you can see more so how these different branches play together, just like the three different branches all interrelate in the federal government. So, where does judicial power come from? Well, Article 6 of the Illinois Constitution states that the Illinois judicial system will have three tiers of courts. We start with the first level of courts, the circuit court. This is where you typically will file a claim within a court. If the decision of that case is appealed, it would go to an Illinois appellate court, and finally the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court of Illinois, or the Illinois Supreme Court. So it's a different Supreme Court than the Supreme Court of the United States, or SCOTUS. I think it's also important to note that there is, the chance, it happens rarely, but there's always the ability for an appeal to go from the Illinois Supreme Court up to SCOTUS, the highest court within the entire country. The Illinois Supreme Court's the highest court within the state. So, the Illinois Circuit Courts, the first tier of courts where most people would file a claim. There are 25 judicial circuits within the states. They're numbered 1 through 24, and then the 25th is the Circuit Court of Cook County, which is special, so it gets its own special name. Each circuit has a chief justice, and those judges, all circuit court judges are elected by public vote. So we get to vote for our judges within the state. And I think that's important to know because we, federally, you don't get to vote for judges. They are appointed. And then the chief judge is voted on by the other circuit court judges. So all the judges that we vote in our circuits, they pick amongst themselves for who the chief judge of that circuit will be. And then there's also, we're not going to talk a lot about them, but associate judges within the circuits, they're appointed by the circuit judges, and they fill certain seats, vacancies. So they're not elected, but they're still important to note that not every judge is elected within the state, but most seats are elected positions. And each circuit has a circuit court clerk. Circuit court clerks maintain court records and official documents, and they're also elected by public vote. Very important to remember because circuit clerks are in charge of a lot of important documents, transcripts from courts, things like that, things that can be important later on if there's an appeal or something. So now we are going to watch a scene from one of my favorite movies and just see court in action and talk a little bit about it as well. Apologies for the ad. I thought I had it set up already. I'll try to get through this quickly. So one thing you'll notice, or if you remember in Legally Blonde, is that our protagonist, Al Woods, is actually a law student working on this trial, which you might find weird because, you have to be admitted to the bar in order to practice law. But we'll talk about that shortly. For now, enjoy the clip.
Miss Wyndham, what had you done earlier that day?
I got up, got a latte, went to the gym, got a perm, and came home.
Well, you got in the shower?
I believe the witness has made it clear that she was in the shower.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss Wyndham, had you ever gotten a perm before?
Yes,
How many would you say?
2 a year since I was 12. You do the math.
You know, a girl in my sorority, Tracy Marcinko, got a perm once. We all tried to talk her out of it. Girls weren't a good look for her. She didn't have your structure. But thankfully, that same day, she entered the Beta Delta Pi wet t-shirt contest where she was completely hosed down from head to toe.
Objection. Why is this relevant?
Oh, I have a point, I promise.
Then make it.
Chutney, why is it that Tracy Marcinko's curls were ruined when she got hosed down?
Because they got wet.
Exactly. Because isn't it the first cardinal rule of perm maintenance that you're forbidden to wet your hair for at least 24 hours after getting a perm at the risk of deactivating the ammonium thioglycolate?
Yes.
And wouldn't somebody who's had, say, 30 perms before in their life be well aware of this rule? And if in fact you weren't washing your hair, as I suspect you weren't because your curls are still intact, wouldn't you have heard the gunshot? And if in fact you had heard the gunshot, Brooke Wyndham wouldn't have had time to hide the gun before you got downstairs, which would mean that you would have had to have found Mrs. Wyndham with a gun in her hand to make your story plausible. Isn't that right?
She's my age. Did she tell you that? How would you feel if your father married someone who was your age?
You, however, had time to hide the gun, didn't you, Chutney? After you shot your father.
I didn't mean to shoot him. I thought it was you walking through the door.
Order, order. Order. Oh my.
Okay, so what did we just watch there? We watched a law student run a murder trial as a defense attorney. So how is this possible? In Illinois, it's a little bit different, but there are ways for law students to work on a trial. I believe it has to be in a public office, say a state's attorney's office or the public defender's office, but Illinois Supreme Court rule, so a rule from the Supreme Court, Rule 711 states that law students can work under attorney supervision during trial, meaning that it's supervised, which Elle was being supervised within this scenario as well. I believe in Illinois, you have to be halfway through law school. And she wasn't at this point in the film. Again, kind of not really the whole point of me showing you the video. That was just a fun fact. In the video, we're watching a murder trial, right? Well, this is the first time the case is being heard, meaning that the charges were brought against the defendant, and it's being heard in, if this was Illinois, in a circuit court. This is where these cases would be heard, within the circuit courts of Illinois. Now, if the defendant was convicted, they could always appeal, and their appeal would be heard in the Illinois appellate courts. So we talked earlier about the different districts the different circuits. There was 25 in total. Well, in Illinois, there's the next tier of courts, the appellate courts. There's only 5 districts of appellate courts. You can kind of see on the map up here these different districts for appellate courts. They're broken up by population. So each one is supposed to have just about the same amount of citizens in each district. Again, you can see Cook County in of itself is its own appellate court system. So while the other counties are combined, and even in the circuits, some circuit courts have multiple counties in them. Cook County, again, is on its own. And that's just, again, has to do with the amount of people that live in Cook County. Appellate courts hear cases where error may have occurred from the circuit courts. So this would be if, say, a defendant was convicted. Let's say that trial from Legally Bond. Defendant was convicted, but they say that a piece of evidence was admitted into the trial that, according to law, was an impermissible piece of evidence and put a biased look on the jury to make it look like the defendant was guilty, and the defendant's rights under the Constitution were violated. They could bring a claim for appeal to the Illinois appellate courts. That was a mouthful, but that's essentially, the appellate courts don't hear cases the same way that circuit courts do. Because circuit courts, like I said, hear cases for the first time. Appellate courts don't do any fact finding. They're not listening to the whole story again. They're just hearing the issues on appeal being, were someone's constitutional rights violated? Did something happen in the trial that made it unfair for the defendant? And within the appellate courts, trials within the appellate courts are heard by panels of 3 judges. And in order for a decision to be made, it's the majority of those 3 judges. So if 2 judges vote one way based upon the arguments they hear, then that is the decision made within that case. Again, appellate judges are elected, so this is up to us to pick who's representing us within the appellate courts. I'm in DuPage County, so I'm in the 2nd appellate district. Cook County is the 1st appellate district. You can kind of see on this map, but you get to vote for the people within your own district. And then the highest court within the state is the Illinois Supreme Court. They have original and exclusive jurisdiction in all matters involving redistricting and fitness of governor. Huge responsibility. So a big thing talked about right now in politics is gerrymandering, which is redistricting in order to favor one party. That's what redistricting means here, which means that if someone is claiming that there's gerrymandering to an unconstitutional degree, the Supreme Court would hear that argument, the Supreme Court of Illinois. They can also have exclusive jurisdiction over the fitness of the governor. We talked earlier about Rod Blagojevich being impeached and removed from office. That was by the legislature. But say the governor, something terrible happened and there was like a major accident, natural disaster, and the governor can't be found. The Illinois Supreme Court could, they have the power to say we need someone else in the governor's office at this point in time. Illinois Supreme Court justices are also elected. Again, another difference from the federal court system. However, their terms are a lot different than the other offices we've talked about. They serve terms of they serve a 10-year term when they're first elected. So if there's a vacancy on the court, the Supreme Court, multiple people will run, but each party will put up their own nominee, and people will vote between the 2 of them for who will take that seat. Whoever wins will then hold that seat for 10 years. After 10 years, instead of a re-election, there is another election, but that judge runs unopposed. So it's just an election of retention, meaning that their name will be on the ballot and we will be asked as citizens to vote whether we want them to stay on the court or whether we want them to leave the court. Now, this is something that, doing my research, brand new or news to me. I think that this is one of those things where not a lot of people know about. So when you show up to vote and you just see someone's name, yes or no, because they're running unopposed, they don't need to do a ton of campaigning. You don't necessarily know their platforms, how they've ruled in the past, and what have you. And therefore, it's kind of hard to make those decisions unless you do the research. And that's what we're here to talk about, why it's important to know who you're voting for. So why vote? We've talked about the 10th Amendment a lot over these past couple of videos, how the United States Constitution states that all powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states. So justices hear cases on topics left to the states by the federal government. Again, what just happened with the United States Supreme Court? They overturned Roe v. Wade through their decision in Dobbs, meaning that all matters regarding abortions are left up to the states, meaning that we're now abortions cannot be heard at the Supreme Court level. All issues regarding abortions will be heard at the state level. So issues that are big, like abortions, are left to our state Supreme Courts. So another big difference now, though, is we get to vote for the justices on the Supreme Court in Illinois. So again, whether you're for or against abortion, you get to have a say on who's in the highest court in the country if an abortion case is brought up to them. Alrighty, well, that wraps up our video lecture series. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to all of these. I know it was a bit of a time commitment, but hopefully they were broken up in a way that you could sit down and watch each of them. I hope that if anyone has any questions, they aren't afraid to reach out to me. My contact information will be attached in one way or another to these videos when you view them. So appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching again, and hope this helped.